George Washington, the first President of the United States, the only president to be unanimously elected to the office twice. He served 2 terms from 1789 until 1797. He refused a 3rd term, setting a precedent that lasted until Franklin Roosevelt. Washington passed away Saturday, December the 14th, 1799, at the age of 67, only 2 years after retiring from the presidency. 2 days earlier, he had been working in the cold, wet weather around his home at Mount Vernon. On the morning of his death, he woke up during the night with trouble breathing, unable to speak or swallow. 3 doctors were summoned. As was custom practice, they agreed on bloodletting. Within a few hours, President Washington had lost 1/2 of his blood content. Martha Washington, the nation's first First Lady, was 57 years old when she became First Lady. In her younger years, she was described as being lovely and attractive with a lively personality. Martha Dingrage will marry her first husband, Daniel Custis, on May 15, 1750. She was 18 and Daniel was 38. Daniel will die 7 years later, leaving Martha one of the wealthiest widows in Virginia. Martha and Daniel had 4 children. Her first 2, Daniel and Francis, will both die before the age of 5 with malaria. Her son Jackie will die at the age of 27 from a virulent illness, and her daughter Patsy, all of her life suffered from seizures, and Patsy died from a particular violent one on November the 5th, 1781, at the age of 17. George Washington and Martha married on January the 6th, 1759. The attraction between George and Martha was immediate. Martha, each year during the Revolutionary War, would make arduous journeys to his camp, no matter where he was at. Between 1775 and 1783, Martha spent over half her time with her husband in military camps. And on May the 22nd, 1802, Martha will succumb to fever at her estate at Mount Vernon, less than 2.5 years after her husband's death. Martha was 70 years old. John Adams, 2nd President of the United States. He was in office for 1 term from 1797 until 1801. President Adams was the first president to reside in the White House. Adams will build up the American Army and Navy during his presidency, and is sometimes called the father of the American Navy. Less than a month before his death, John Adams gave the nation this warning: the United States is destined in the future history to form the brightest and the blackest page, according to the use or the abuse of those political institutions by which they shall, in time to come, be shaped by the human mind. President Adams will pass on July the 4th, American Independence Day, in 1826, at his home in Quincy, Massachusetts, at the age of 90. Abigail Smith Adams, the nation's 2nd First Lady. Abigail was 52 when she became First Lady. Although Abigail was not formally educated, she was well taught at home that actually surpassed formal education. On October the 25th, 1764, she married John Adams, a country lawyer. That was considered beneath her social station. After the marriage ceremonies, they both straddled a single horse and rode off to their small cottage. Abigail had so much influence over her husband, opponents referred to her as Mrs. President. She was a staunch supporter of women's property rights and detested slavery, saying that she didn't believe that those men really believed in liberty as much as they claimed and could still own slaves. Abigail was the first First Lady to have both a husband and a son as president. The other was Barbara Bush. Abigail Adams passed away on October the 28th, 1818, less than 8 years before her husband's death. She was 73 years old. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States. He will serve 2 terms as president, from 1801 until 1809. Thomas Jefferson is considered being the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. During his presidency, he will acquire the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the United States and sending the explorers Lewis and Clark to the Northwest. Jefferson will marry his third cousin, Martha Skelton, on January the 1st, 1772. Martha was the 23-year-old widow of Bathurst Skelton. Her first husband died 2 years after their marriage, and their only child died before the age of 3. Jefferson and Martha will have 6 kids. Martha will pass away September the 6th, 1782, 19 years before Thomas Jefferson becomes president. She was 33 years old. Thomas Jefferson will pass on July the 4th, the nation's birthday, 1826, at his Monticello home. He was 83 years old. The nation's third First Lady was Martha Jefferson Randolph, the 28-year-old daughter of Thomas and Martha Jefferson. Although Martha was married to Thomas Randolph Jr. and she had 12 children, she was devoted to her father and acted as First Lady in place of her deceased mother, also named Martha. Martha will pass away October the 10th, 1836, at the age of 64. James Madison Jr., 4th President of the United States. President Madison served 2 terms as president from 1809 until 1817. Madison was president during the War of 1812. He did not want war with England, but British ships kept seizing U.S. trade ships, and he felt he had no choice. The British captured Washington and burned the White House during his presidency. Fortunately, the last battle was the Battle of New Orleans, won by General Andrew Jackson, saving the government. Madison stood 5 foot 4 inches tall and weighed 100 pounds. He was the only American president except George Washington to sign the Declaration of Independence. James Madison died June 28, 1836, at Montpelier, Virginia. He was 85 years old. The 4th First Lady of the United States was Dolly Payne Madison. Dolly was 40 years old when she became First Lady. In January 1790, Dolly Payne married John Todd, a Quaker lawyer from Philadelphia. She soon had 2 sons. In August 1793, a yellow fever epidemic hit Philadelphia. Her 29-year-old husband and her 3-month-old son succumbed to the fever. At age 25, with a small son, Dolly was widowed. She will meet and soon marry James Madison, September 15, 1794. She was expelled from the Quaker religion for marrying a non-Quaker. Dolly was 40 years old when she became First Lady. She was a lively host and believed it helped her husband's career by putting on large parties at the White House. During the War of 1812, Dolly saved important documents and White House portraits as the British were closing in. They soon burned the White House. She is credited with bravery. Dolly Madison passed away July the 12th, 1849, 13 years after her husband's death. Dolly was 81 years old. James Monroe, 5th President of the United States, served 2 terms as president from 1817 to 1825. In 1823, Monroe enacted the Monroe Doctrine. The United States would no longer allow European countries to interfere or colonize within the Western Hemisphere, and the United States would not interfere with the affairs of the existing colonies. James Monroe will pass away of a heart failure and tuberculosis on July the 4th, 1831, at the age of 73. He was the 3rd president to die on Independence Day. Elizabeth Courtwright Monroe was the 5th First Lady of the United States. Liz was 48 years old when she became First Lady. She married James Monroe on February the 6th, 1786, at the age of 17. She will bear James 3 children, Eliza, James, and Maria. James will die at 16 months old. Maria will be the first daughter to get married in the White House. A journalist wrote of Elizabeth that she is elegant, accomplished, possessing a charming mind and dignity of manners. Washington society thought her to be aloof. She seldom attended social functions. In truth, she suffered from epilepsy. It was called the falling disease. She was protected by family, and it was considered a mental disease at that time. She was so ill at the end of her husband's term, they remained in the White House 3 weeks after his term as president had expired. A year after leaving the White House, she will suffer a severe seizure and fall in the fireplace, receiving extensive burns. Elizabeth Monroe will pass away at her home September 23, 1830, at the age of 62. John Quincy Adams, 6th President of the United States. He will serve 1 term from 1825 until 1829. He is the son of John Adams, the 2nd President of our country. The political friends of Andrew Jackson accused Adams of corruption and blocked his activities. He argued against slavery and for free speech. After losing to Andrew Jackson, Adams, a year later, in 1830, was elected to the House of Representatives and remained there until February 1848, when he will collapse on the House floor from a stroke. He will be taken to the Speaker's room and will pass away 2 days later on February the 21st, 1848, at the age of 80. Louisa Johnson Adams is the 6th First Lady of the United States. She was 50 years old when she became First Lady. She is the first First Lady to be born outside the United States, England. She married John Quincy Adams July the 26th, 1797. John was 30 and Louisa was 22. They had 4 children. She will be plagued by migraine headaches and fainting spells. She will suffer several miscarriages during the course of their marriage, and in 1811 she had a 1-year-old daughter to die while John was Minister of Russia. Later, as First Lady, she became reclusive and depressed. For a time she regretted marrying into the Adams family. After her husband's death, she will remain in Washington. On May the 15th, 1852, Ms. Adams will pass away of a heart attack at the age of 77. Andrew Jackson, 7th President of the United States. He'll serve 2 terms as president, from 1829 until 1837. His fame from winning the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812 will help his political career. During his political climb to the presidency, he will duel with Charles Dickinson over a disagreement from a horse race and personal insults towards Jackson's wife, Rachel. Dickinson was an expert shot. Jackson planned to let Dickinson fire first, and then he would be able to take a slow, careful aim. Jackson wore a large coat and tried to hide the location of his heart. Dickinson fired and missed Jackson's heart by 2 inches. Jackson, although wounded, continued standing and fired a fatal shot at Dickinson that died a few hours later. Doctors will not remove the bullet from Jackson. Jackson would carry the bullet in his chest for life. He was known to have a temper that involved him in dozens of duels. Most of them ended in firing in the air and missed their opponents on purpose. As president, Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, forcing the eastern tribes to give up their homelands, setting in motion the Trail of Tears. Jackson survived an attempt on his life as president. Richard Lawrence, an unemployed house painter, entered the House chambers, shot at the president, and his gun misfired. 67-year-old Jackson beat Lawrence with his cane. Lawrence pulled another gun and it misfired. It was determined later that both guns were in good working order. The chances of both guns misfiring was 1 in 125,000. Jackson was the first president to experience an assassination attempt. Andrew Jackson will pass away at his home at the Hermitage in Nashville on June 8, 1845, at the age of 78. Tests recently from a strand of Jackson's hair indicates that Charles Dickinson may have actually killed President Jackson after all. Lead poisoning was found in his system. Rachel Donaldson Jackson was the 7th First Lady of the United States. Rachel was married first to Captain Louis Robard, a landowner of Kentucky. It was rumored that he was jealous and cruel to her. It was not a happy affair. Rachel left Louis in 1790 and returned to her family home. Believing that Louis had filed for divorce, the confusion came when Kentucky went from being a territory to becoming a state. Lots of papers were misplaced or not filed. Kentuckians all understood the problem, and in 1793, Rachel and Andrew learned of the mistake and in 1794 quickly remarried. Rachel was considered quite beautiful in her younger years. During Jackson's run for president, his foe will accuse Rachel of being an adulteress and worse. She will pass away December the 22nd, 1828, at the age of 61, a few months after her husband was elected to the presidency and before his inauguration. She will never live in the White House. Jackson believed that his opponents was the cause of Rachel's early death. Her niece, Emily Donaldson, will serve as Jackson's White House hostess in Rachel's place. Martin Van Buren will serve as the 8th President of the United States. He will serve one term from 1837 until 1841. Martin Van Buren is the first president to be born an American and not a British citizen. Van Buren said the 2 happiest days of his life was his first day as president and his last. In 1838, Van Buren ordered the removal of all the Cherokee, resulting in furtherance of the Trail of Tears. In 1838, the governor of Missouri ordered the lethal force removal of 20,000 Mormons from Missouri. Joseph Smith pleaded to Van Buren to intercede for the Mormons. Van Buren's reply to Smith was, "Your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you. If I take up for you, I will lose Missouri." Martin Van Buren will retire to his home in Kinderhook, New York, where on July the 24th, 1862, he'll pass away at the age of 79. Hanna Van Buren was the 8th First Lady of the United States. Although she passed away 17 years before her husband became president, Hanna and Martin were second cousins and childhood sweethearts. They had 5 children. She was close to her husband and supported his political career. Hanna Van Buren will pass away February the 5th, 1819, from a long and bitter battle with tuberculosis. Hanna was 35 years old. Her daughter-in-law, Angela Van Buren, will serve as White House hostess in Hanna's place. William Henry Harrison, the 9th President of the United States. He served in office from 4 March 1841 until 4 April 1841, 1 month. Contrary to popular belief that he caught pneumonia from his inaugural speech being so long in the cold rain, it was actually 3 weeks later that he caught a cold. Harrison was the last president born a British subject. His presidency is the shortest in U.S. history. He passed away in office April 4th, 1841, at the age of 68 from pneumonia. Anna Harrison was the 9th First Lady of the United States. She married William Harrison November the 25th, 1795, by eloping against her father's will. They will have 10 children. Anna was 66 years old when she became First Lady. She was First Lady the shortest time of all. She'll be the only First Lady to have a husband and grandson, Benjamin Harrison, to serve as president. Ann Harrison will pass away February the 25th, 1864 at the age of 88. John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States. John Tyler will serve one term from 1841 until 1845. Tyler was the Vice President of William Henry Harrison and became President after Harrison's untimely death. He served longer than any president not elected to office. John Tyler will pass away on January the 18th, 1862, at the age of 71. Lydia Tyler was the 10th First Lady of the United States. John and Lydia, as she was called, was married 29 years with 8 children. Lydia will pass away September the 10th, 1942, less than 2 years after moving into the White House. Lydia will suffer from a stroke, limiting her activities. Her second stroke will cause her to be the first First Lady to pass away in the White House. James K. Polk, the 11th President of the United States. He will serve one term from 1845 until 1849. During the presidency, he will oversee the annexation of Texas. After Mexico's objection to the U.S. annexation of Texas, Polk achieved a complete victory over Mexico, resulting in the succession of most of the Southwest by Mexico to the United States. Polk promised to serve only one term, and that's what he did. After leaving Washington and going back to Tennessee, 3 months later, on June 15, 1849, President James Polk will die of cholera at the age of 53. Sarah Childress Polk was the 11th First Lady of the United States. She was 41 when she became First Lady. She married James Polk on January 1, 1824. Sarah was 20 and James was 28. They had no children of their own, but raised a nephew, and after James's death she took in an orphan, Nellie, as her own. She will always wear black, mourning her husband. Sarah died August 14, 1891, at the age of 87. General Zachary Taylor, the 12th President of the United States. President Taylor was served for only 16 months from March 1849 until July 1850. On July the 4th, 1850, President Taylor and several members of his cabinet will celebrate a fundraising event for the Washington Monument that was under construction. The group ate raw fruit and iced milk. Several cabinet members also became ill with fever. President Zachary Taylor passed away from intestinal infection at 10:35 p.m. July the 9th, 1850. He was 65 years old. Margaret Smith Taylor, the 12th First Lady of the United States. Peggy, as she was called, married 25-year-old Lieutenant Zachary Taylor when she was 21. On July the 21st, 1810, the Taylors had 6 children, and she stayed at their plantation near Rodney, Mississippi, when her husband was off to war. One of her daughters, Noxie Taylor, was the first wife of Jefferson Davis. It's been said that Peggy literally prayed that her husband would lose the race for president. After years of following her husband from military post to post and having 6 children, she only wanted to rest. As a semi-invalid, when President Taylor was elected, she secluded herself to the second floor of the White House. Her duties as hostess was left to her daughter, Betty. After the sudden death of her husband, her health began to further decline. She will pass away 2 years later on August 14, 1852, in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Millard Fillmore, the 13th President of the United States. President Fillmore was served from July the 9th, 1950 until March 4, 1853, serving out the term of his predecessor, Zachary Taylor. President Fillmore left the office as the first president not to be independently wealthy. He had to go into law practice to make a living for his family. 5 years after the death of Abigail, he will marry Carolyn McIntosh, a rich widow. Millard Fillmore will pass away March the 8th, 1874 at the age of 74 in Buffalo, New York. Abigail Powers Fillmore, the 13th First Lady of the United States. She has the distinction of being the first First Lady to hold a job after marriage. She married Millard Fillmore in February 1826. She was a teacher and resumed teaching until her husband was able to establish himself as a lawyer. She will have 2 children. In 1849, she will come to Washington as the wife of the Vice President. 16 months later, she will become First Lady. Abigail will establish the first real library in the White House. It's been said that she performed with grace at state dinners and receptions. Although by the end of her husband's term, she was in poor health, she insisted on standing by her husband's side through a winter snowstorm at President Pierce's inauguration. Returning chilled to the Willard Hotel where they were staying, she developed pneumonia and died 3 weeks after leaving the White House on March the 30th, 1853. Abigail was 55 years old. Franklin Pierce, 14th President of the United States. He'll serve 1 term, 1853 until 1857. On November the 19th, 1834, Franklin Pierce marries Jane Appleton. Through their marriage, Jane will suffer from tuberculosis and mental disorder, discouraging Franklin's political career. Pierce began his presidency in deep mourning. After Pierce was elected president and before he took office, the Pierce family was traveling by train from Boston when the train derailed. Franklin and Jane survived, but their last remaining child, Benjamin, age 11, was crushed to death. It is believed to have affected his presidency. After his term as president in mid-1869, his health began to decline from drinking too much. Knowing that he was dying from cirrhosis of the liver, he hired a caretaker to help him through his final days. No family members were present at his death. President Franklin Pierce passed away October the 8th, 1869, at the age of 64. Jane Appleton Pierce, the 14th First Lady of the United States. Jane was 46 when she became First Lady. Jane Appleton married Franklin Pierce November the 19th, 1834. She was 28 and Franklin was 30. They will have 3 boys. In 1836, her first son, Franklin Jr., died 3 days after birth. Jane didn't want to be a politician's wife and tried to persuade her husband to stay out of politics. She blamed politics for her son Franklin Jr.'s death and her husband's problem with alcohol. At the age of 4, their son Robert will die from typhoid fever, 2 months before her husband is inaugurated as president. Traveling on a train with her husband and 11-year-old son Benjamin, when the passenger train derailed and traveled down an embankment, turning over and crushing Benjamin. He was the only fatality. Jane will never completely recover from the loss of her child. For 2 years, she will stay in the second-floor quarters of the White House. She will remain in depression until 1855. At a New Year's Eve reception, Jane will appear, making her first official First Lady appearance. She will become ill when her tuberculosis gets worse later on, after her husband's term expires, and she will pass away December the 2nd, 1862, at the age of 57. James Buchanan, 15th President of the United States. He will serve one term from 1857 until 1861. During his presidency, 7 southern states seceded from the Union, bringing the nation to the brink of civil war. In September 1857, the Mormon militia perpetrated the Mountain Meadows Massacre, killing settlers on their way to California. Buchanan sent federal troops to Utah to remove Brigham Young as territorial governor. An agreement was reached between the church and leaders of the government before all war broke out. Young remained the head of the church, but was replaced as governor. James Buchanan will remain a committed bachelor all his life. The Civil War erupted only 2 months after Buchanan's term was over. In May of 1868, President Buchanan caught a cold that quickly grew worse. He will pass away June 1, 1868, from respiratory failure at the age of 77. Harriet Lane Johnson, the 15th First Lady of the United States. Harriet was 26-years-old when she became First Lady of the United States for her Uncle James. Her parents had left her and her sister orphaned at a young age. Their Uncle James Buchanan became guardian. Harriet will use her position as First Lady to improve living conditions for Native Indians. She was a very popular First Lady. Leaving the White House at the age of 36, Harriet will marry Henry Johnson. She will have 2 sons. Within 18 years, her husband, her 2 sons, and her uncle will all pass away. Harriet Lane Johnson will pass away on 3rd July 1903 at the age of 73. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States. He'll serve 1 term and be elected to a second one from March 4, 1861 through April 15, 1865. Abraham Lincoln married Mary Todd on November 4, 1842. They'll have 4 boys. Within the first year of Lincoln's presidency, he will contend with the Civil War. Holding the Union together was the greatest problem any president ever faced. The future of the nation was at stake. An even greater burden on the president will come within his first year on February 20, 1862, when his 3rd son, 11-year-old Willie, will succumb to typhoid fever. The president and the White House will go into mourning while carrying on a war. By the close of the war, President Lincoln had just been elected a 2nd term and was looking forward to uniting the country again through his plans of generous reconstruction. On April 15, 1865, only 5 days after the surrender of General Lee, President Abraham Lincoln will be assassinated by a Southern sympathizer. President Lincoln was 56 years old. Mary Todd Lincoln, the 16th First Lady of the United States. Mary Lincoln was 42 years old when she became First Lady. Mary was supportive of her husband's political ambitions. Her 2nd son Edward passed away at the age of 3 from diphtheria in 1815, 10 years before entering the White House. Her tenure as First Lady was misery and triumph. Within a year after becoming First Lady, she will lose her 3rd son Willie to typhoid fever. At the same time, her youngest son Tad was also stricken with typhoid. Although he will recover, after Willie's death, she curtailed her White House duties and was accused of shirking her job as First Lady. She was accused of being a traitor to the Union because she was raised in Kentucky. The president once said of his wife, "I fell in love with her, and what's more, I never have fallen out." After her husband's assassination, she traveled with her son Tad for 17 years, searching for mental stability. She had become disillusional, and when her young son Tad died of tuberculosis at the age of 18, Mary had to be committed to a mental institution by her older son Robert. She'll be released after 4 months. Mary Todd Lincoln will pass away July the 16th, 1882, at her sister's home in Illinois, where she had wed years earlier. She was 63 years old. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States. He'll serve one term from April 15, 1865 through March 4, 1869. Johnson had been Lincoln's vice president less than 1 month when Lincoln was assassinated. He'll serve the remainder of Lincoln's term. Northern senators were not supportive of Johnson, being the only senator that did not leave the Union when his state of Tennessee seceded. He'll be the first president to be impeached. He held his office by 1 vote. After leaving the presidency, he will be elected to serve in the Senate and remains the only former president to serve in the Senate. He will suffer a stroke at his daughter Mary's home in Elizabethtown, Tennessee. President Johnson will pass away July the 31st, 1875, at the age of 66. He'll be buried wrapped in the American flag with the U.S. Constitution placed under his head. Eliza McArdle Johnson, the 17th First Lady of the United States. Eliza Johnson was 54 years old when she became First Lady. She supported her husband in his political career, but she was not able to attend to her First Lady's duties as she was stricken with tuberculosis and seldom left her White House bedroom. Her daughter Martha performed as the White House hostess. Eliza performed as the First Lady in public only twice, once at a reception of Queen Emma of the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1866, and at the President's birthday party in 1867. Eliza will pass away on January the 15th, 1876, at the age of 65, 5 years after her husband. Ulysses S Grant, 18th President of the United States. He'll serve 2 terms from 1869 until 1877. President Grant will be the first president to take office without having held a public office before. Although Grant himself was not involved in the corruption, his administration had one scandal after another. The president blamed his inexperience in political matters for not being able to control his appointees. He was stubbornly loyal to them. Grant was able to push through the 15th Amendment, giving black men the right to vote. He also established the National Park Service. After leaving the White House, President Grant went into a business adventure with a friend of his son Buck's, Frederick Ward. The business failed, and when his son's friend was discovered embezzling money, Ward eventually went to jail for it, and Grant went bankrupt. Knowing Grant's financial problems, Congress restored his military pension that he had to give up to become president. He paid off his remaining debts by writing his Civil War memoirs. President Grant will pass away from cancer only a few days after finishing his book on July the 23rd, 1885, at the age of 63. Julia Dent Grant, 18th First Lady of the United States. Julia was 43 when she became First Lady. She had 4 children. She struggled to raise the prestige of the First Ladies and the wives of the domestic corps. She was devastated when she learned her husband would not run for a 3rd term. After leaving the White House, Julia became friends with future First Ladies and gave advice. Julia Grant passed away December the 14th, 1902, at the age of 76. Rutherford B Hayes, 19th President of the United States. President Hayes will serve 1 term from 1877 until 1881. Hayes was fought by Congress because he was trying to end the spoils system. where federal jobs was given for political favors. President Hayes was the first president to travel west of the Rockies on a 70-day one tour. Hayes has pledged not to run for a second term, and he kept his word. After leaving the White House, President Hayes said that a country where a few people own most of the land and large masses of the people cannot own a home will not stand. He was against so much wealth in the hands of a few. After his wife Lucy's death, he was lost. His daughter Fanny became his traveling companion. His pleasure became his grandchildren. President Hayes will pass away of heart trouble at his home on January the 17th, 1893, at the age of 70. Lucy Webb Hayes, the 19th First Lady of the United States. Lucy was 45 when she became First Lady. She married Rutherford B Hayes on December the 30th, 1852. Due to her objections to alcohol, the White House banned liquor for all social functions as long as she was First Lady. The newspaper said water flowed like wine at the White House tonight. Strange enough, Lucy was not a supporter of prohibition and did not condemn others for drink. Lucy was the first wife of a president to be called First Lady by the press. Lucy was the first First Lady to have bathrooms and running water in the White House. And papers said Lucy was beautiful and did not look as if she had 8 children. After the White House, the Hayeses will spend the next 8 years at their home in Fremont, Ohio. Lucy Webb Hayes will pass away 3.5 years before her husband on June 25, 1889. She suffered a stroke the afternoon before at the age of 57. James A. Garfield, 20th President of the United States. He'll serve 6 months from March 4, 1881 until September 19, 1881. President Garfield will be in office only 4 months when he will attempt to leave Washington on vacation. He had just arrived at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, along with members of his cabinet, when at 9:30 a.m. on the 2nd of July, 1881, Charles Guiteau shot the president twice, once in the arm and once in the back. He believed Garfield should have appointed him as counsel to Paris. His family had had him committed, but he had escaped. He had wrote the White House threatening the president several occasions. He wrote even the commanding general of the armed forces threatening the president. All these threats were ignored. President Garfield would be taken to the White House. When Garfield asked his friend, one of the doctors, what his chances were, the doctor said, 1 in 100. Garfield replied, "I'll take those odds." The president seemed to be improving, but 2 months later, on September the 19th, 1881, infection was spread, believed from unsterile probes and unclean hands from doctors. President Garfield will succumb to his wounds at the age of 49. The assassin will be hanged on June 30th, 1882. Lucinda Rudolph Garfield, the 20th First Lady of the United States. Lucinda was 48 years old when she became First Lady. She married James Garfield on November 11th, 1858. They will have 7 children. Only 5 will reach adulthood. Although it was only for a short time, she was respected as being a gracious First Lady. She spoke several languages, and soon after reaching the White House, she contracted malaria and was sent to Long Beach, New Jersey for recuperation. When her husband was lingering for 2.5 months after he had been wounded, she stayed by his side day and night, gaining the respect and sympathy of the nation. After the death of her husband, she'll spend her time attending to his presidential papers and property and trying to protect his legacy. At the beginning of World War I, she will volunteer for the Red Cross. Lucinda Garfield, will pass away on March the 14th, 1918, at her home in South Pasadena, California, at the age of 85. Chester A. Arthur, 20th President of the United States. President Arthur will serve from September the 19th, 1881 until March the 4th, 1885, serving the remainder term of James Garfield. President Arthur had never run for public office until Vice President. All his positions were appointed. During Garfield's recuperation, Arthur was quiet because the assassin of President Garfield claimed to have assassinated him so that Arthur could be president. The country was leery about Arthur becoming president, but was pleased with his policies and abilities once he took office. In November of 1886, just 18 months after leaving office, he will suffer a cerebral hemorrhage and pass away on November the 18th, 1886, at the age of 57. Ellen Herndon Arthur, the 21st First Lady of the United States, Nell as she was called, married Chester Arthur on the 25th of October, 1859. She was 22 and he was 30. She'll have 3 children before her husband becomes Vice President. Nell will attend a benefit concert in New York while her husband was attending meetings in Albany. While waiting on her coach in the rain, she caught pneumonia. She went into a coma before her husband could arrive. Nell passed away the 12th of January, 1880, at the age of 42. President Arthur will not give anyone official title of First Lady that belonged to Nell. He did have his sister Mary to help with White House social functions.